It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
He's back, the beast of Baghdad, the butcher, the man who killed 1 million Muslims in 2003 and beyond, is now back in government in the Middle East. He's one of the board of peace. Not since Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band has an ensemble like them been amassed. And the Europeans are throwing their hands up, not in horror, but in surrender. 5 Italians, 15 Frenchmen, 1 Englishman. It sounds like a joke, but actually it's the expeditionary force of the European Union, assembled without camouflage in what they used to call Greenland, soon will call the 51st State of the Union. Oh, and Donald Trump is about to announce alien life. I'm not making that last one up. It is the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Now let me declare an interest. Me and Tony Blair, we are, well, you know the rest of it. Tony Blair, whenever he became the leader of the Labour Party, I called him a pig in a poke and I never looked back. My chances of advancement in the Labour government of Tony Blair were zero before there was a Labour government of Tony Blair. I was one of the first maybe even the first, but certainly one of the first, who saw through this charlatan, this medicine man, this man who would go on to mesmerize not just the British Labour Party and reshape it in his image, but would capture the heart and mind of Mr. Bill Clinton. Some parts of his body were otherwise engaged, but his heart and his mind were engaged by Tony Blair. Tony Blair bent both Bill Clinton and later George W. Bush around his finger. That's why I say without any compunction that Tony Blair is primarily responsible for the world we have today. I knew it would happen. I knew it would happen when he embarked upon his first war in Sierra Leone. Remember that one? And I warned against it. I warned that this man had a messianic, diabolic thirst, hunger for war. He once said to me in the library corridor, Britain under me is going to punch much heavier than its weight. And I asked him the idiot's question, why do we have to punch at all? Why can't we be a force for good in the world? But he was determined that the entire position of the United Kingdom depended on its relationship with the United States. He could speak European languages. One time he actually contemplated becoming Ursula von der Leyen. I don't mean actually getting it chopped off and changing his gender, although he was well up for that kind of thing. He was primarily responsible for the Californication of British politics and social democratic politics right across the European Union. And, of course, he played this decisive role with his Chicago doctrine, where he invented a doctrine called RTP, the right to protect, which allowed those who could, those who would, to bypass international law, although like Keir Starmer, he was himself a lawyer, they say. He developed this doctrine which theorized the ways in which countries that would avoid the United Nations Security Council, which meant far more 20 years ago than it means today, would be able to circumvent international law, never mind the laws of war, the laws of morality, and go directly to war from A to Z with nobody's say-so but themselves. And that's what they proceeded to do in Yugoslavia. That's what they did even before Yugoslavia in the operation that they launched against Iraq, long before Desert Fox it was, because it was so rabid and mangy. It could only be a Desert Fox when they bombarded Iraq, and I was on hand in the hospitals in Baghdad to bring people, those who wanted to watch, the pictures of the children that he slaughtered there. Children that were already in a mangy position, but were to get very much more so. So once he'd fought Sierra Leone, he fought Yugoslavia, helped to destroy it, helped to create an absolutely invented artificial state that they called Kosovo, and the first country to recognize right was Denmark, about whom more later. So he was on this drunken sailor rampage throughout the world long before the invasion of Iraq. I played, I think, a considerable role, not just in Britain, but across the world, in rousing millions, tens of millions of people against what I perhaps uniquely knew was a completely fraudulent war, and moreover, one that would lead to disaster, not just for the countries to be invaded, but for the countries doing the invading. And so it came to pass. Everything that I predicted would happen in Iraq if Blair and Bush were to invade it happened. Everything that Blair said about a roadmap to peace in Palestine, if only people would allow Britain and America to invade and devastate Iraq, was a lie, a bright, shining lie, which I told you all at the time. There was no roadmap, there is no peace, only the never-ending agony of the Palestinian people. In the process, Mr. Blair expelled me from the Labour Party, alone, the only person expelled over the Iraq war, though there were many critics in the Parliamentary Labour Party, in the Labour Party as a whole, people like Jeremy Corbyn, they were never expelled. Mr. Blair concentrated on me because, correctly, I think, he thought that I was cutting through public opinion more than anyone else would or could. He expelled me from the Labour Party. I told him he would rue the day. He did rue the day, not once, not twice, but thrice. 3 times I defeated the Blair Labour Party in parliamentary elections thereafter. I also made a film of which I'm very proud called The Killings of Tony Blair. If you have not watched it yet, it is available free to air on YouTube. I hounded Tony Blair until he was forced to leave office. But he left office not to penury or pain, not to the kind of isolation, a kind of Siberia of the reputation that he ought to have suffered as a result of having lied Britain into war, having lied our institutions into oblivion, bankrupting the idea that the government could be trusted, bankrupting it forever. He went on to, well, at least richer things. Mr. Tony Blair, as you'll see from my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, became 100 millionaire. He is now worth probably 500 millions. He profited mightily from the death and destruction, more than 1 million people that he wrought. Bush was there too, but the president's brain being missing, Tony Blair was that brain. So, he's obviously the man now to govern Gaza. That was clear from the beginning. He's rich enough, he's diabolic enough, he is satanic enough, and the devil just wasn't available. He's too busy in so many other parts of the world. So, absent Beelzebub, send for Blair. And that's what Donald Trump has done. We'll discuss with our eminently qualified guests this evening what the import, the impact of the second coming of Tony Blair in the Holy Land is likely to be. But I must turn to the Carry On film. Only those of a certain caste, only those of a certain age will remember the farces that used to emanate from the British film studios. They were called Carry On films. Carry on up the Khyber. Carry on up the Nile. Well, there's never been a Carry On like Greenland. The Europeans, having debased themselves for decades, for every year since the end of the Second World War, to the United States, having crawled under the shoes of the United States of America only to polish and lick those shoes, having done everything asked of them by the American empire, allowing the US empire to choose their enemies, allowing the US empire to direct them into war after war after war, are now waking up to realize that after more than half a century of propaganda in which they prepared their entire populations repeatedly, over and over again, of the danger of the Russians and later of the danger of the Chinese, have woken up to discover that they are about to be invaded, their territory dismembered, just like Serbia's territory of Kosovo. Their interests are being literally crushed, not by Russia, not by China, but by the very United States of America that they regarded as their leader, as their father, every year since the end of the Second World War. Donald Trump has many attributes, but the greatest of these attributes is that he represents naked the ugly American, and it's not a pretty sight. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, all that went before them were at least concerned enough to pause before the mirror and make sure their makeup was right, not like Donald Trump. They were concerned enough with proprieties and decencies and deceptions to make sure that they never went out without their lipstick. The end result was the same, but it looked prettier. Donald Trump wakes up in the morning, misapplies his makeup, and goes on a drunken rampage against whomsoever is his enemy of the day. It could be the enemy within. It could be the enemy that used to be within but is now off the agenda. Jeffrey Epstein, anyone? The swamp, anyone? Lock them up, anyone? Russiagate hoax, anyone? No, these enemies are all now long banished into the past. Today's enemy are the European satraps that once sat at his feet. Literally so in one famous photograph where Donald Trump is the one sat behind the desk, and arranged around him like errant schoolchildren were the European Union satraps. He was letting them know, it was an early sign, who was boss. Well, having threatened to annex the Canadian 51st state of the Union, which has just entered into a strategic partnership with the People's Republic of China, with its People's Liberation Army, with its People's Liberation Navy, the largest navy in the world, the largest army in the world, with a hypersonic fleet of nuclear weapons that could turn the United States at least once into ash. Canada is now looking east, as well it might, for protection against the brigand, against the George Armstrong Custer to its south. And so Greenland's getting it instead. Greenland is defended only by Macron, who not only got one black eye this week, he got two, appearing in dark glasses in his pronunciamento of an expeditionary force of 15 Frenchmen. Meloni, the Italians always being a lesser warlike type, sent 5. And the British, unsure how to get off of that American spike that has been up their fundament since 1945, couldn't send nobody, so they sent 1. 5 Italians, 15 Frenchmen, and 1 Englishman. They constitute the Dad's army that has landed in Greenland. And there will not be many more of them. They're there only to hand over a European country to the invading armies of Donald Trump. And like the Carry On pictures, I find it all so terribly funny. It is so funny that the prospect of the Stars and Stripes being raised above a European territory by force of arms fills me not with the dread and alarm that it once might have. It fills me with hilarity, because if anybody deserves such abject subjugation, such pitiful, pathetic, puerile ignominy, it's the European Union and its leaders. I don't have any time left to do justice to the story that is just heaving into view. Once it's announced, it will open a new era in human civilization, if we can call it that. There will be a before this knowledge and an after this knowledge. Donald Trump, in the ultimate coup de theatre, is about to announce the existence of alien life. Not the alien life around his cabinet table, not the alien life on CNN and CNSBC and CBS. That's all long been known to be populated by little green men and women. That's long been known to be the Twilight Zone. No, I mean real alien life. We are not alone, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope to explore that final frontier in the course of the mother of all talk shows. We've got some cracking guests, starting with the font of knowledge, the sage, the philosopher in action, the master of the political arts, the one and only Chay Bowes from Moscow, coming up. Stay tuned. There's a legend on the line in Oklahoma. It's May on Trump. Welcome back, May.
Trump is using a magic 8-ball to make his decision. He apparently has completely lost whatever mind he had to begin with. This is just ridiculous. Does he really think anyone's going to believe that? I'm here to say, and I'm here to join you and everybody else, the emperor has no clothes on. He's as naked as they come. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he got naked with some young people. And that is why he so desperately is trying to kill this whole Epstein thing. And he's just making it worse.
I'm wondering when Donald Trump knew that he was implicated in these Epstein files and what it was that he knew. That's the big question, because he wouldn't have been banging the Epstein drum all this time and then suddenly to pull the rug. That tells me that it was a late decision, that someone came late to Trump to say, you know, you really don't want to be doing that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Breaking news, according to Bild in the Federal Republic of Germany. Germany has secretly called back its 15 troops from Greenland. The joke just got bigger. The poll tonight is ICE Trump's personal Gestapo. You can answer yes or no on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, on the YouTube stream, and if you are a part of the Vanguard, on the patreon.com/George Galloway. Nearly 20,000 people have voted already, and we'll get back to that. If you want to call the show, it's toll free in the United States and Canada, now that we know they are going to be separate countries because Canada is now China-backed. The toll-free, of course, +1 844 944 3344. It's free in Britain and Ireland, which are two separate countries, and forever may they be so. 0808 196 5522 is the number there. The worldwide number is not free, alas. 0044 203 966 2625. Now, Chay Bowes, my good friend and my go-to, frankly, for what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, to which we will turn in a minute, I promise you, is a master of the political arts. Literally so. He's an MA in politics, but he's an even better commentator. And he's very seldom wrong. And he joins me now from, I presume, Moscow. Chay, great to see you again. I'd like to start with the developments in the sphere of extraterrestrial alien life. Maybe we'll have time to get to that, but before that we must talk about the alien life assembled without Arctic camouflage. Talk about sitting penguins in Greenland. The expeditionary force of Starmer, Macron and Meloni. You couldn't make this up, could you, Chay?
Just listening to your masterful introduction there and your monologue, it's always just great. I mean, look, one word came to mind, and it's this German word. And I suggest everybody get on Google now, not while the show's on, as soon as it's finished, and look up the term Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is, I think, the sense which many people on our side of the political divide and the sort of the divide between what's been happening, this war machine, this terrible hegemonous machine that has, you know, littered corpses across the globe in the post-war period, the post-Second World War period, as it massacred the continents, Africa, Asia, from Vietnam, Korea, and the silence of the sort of supplicant European countries as this brutal machine sort of did its business has been deafening. And we've seen it most recently in Ukraine, of course, a Nazi supporting regime, grossly corrupt, people like you, people like Guy, who have come out to tell the truth about Ukraine, vilified, marginalized, arrested, denied our rights, our privileges, attacked at every end. And suddenly we see that this tiger, which the Europeans very sort of aggressively in some ways thought that they were superior to as well. There's a sense of this European superiority when it came to America. You know, they were great for security, great for the muscle. You know, the big dumb American cousin was going to keep the Russians away. And we now see that this perceived Russian threat. I mean, we were told in the 1970s perpetually, consistently, that the Russians were going to invade Europe. Well, the Russians were saying, look, the Europeans will do a very good job at destroying themselves. We probably don't need to do anything at all. The capitalist systems that have, you know, delivered us here, if you like, are so corrupt and so focused on profit that there's probably not a lot we need to do to sit back. Now, of course, the Europeans and their American masters were very good at undermining the Soviet project. It collapsed. And a lot of the geostrategic and geopolitical issues we have now on the continent of Europe are, you know, remnants of that delusional attitude. But right in the midst of all this now, it's quite remarkable to watch these headless chickens rushing around. I read today that Mr. Macron announced that the European Union would use a bazooka of essential sanctions, but they are actually, in fact, tariffs against the United States, the anti-coercion instrument, which is a a draconian set of laws that the Europeans hold in reserve to prevent themselves being coerced into any sort of issue globally. And that's going to be deployed potentially against the United States of America. I also wrote recently that the European Union were compiling a significant list of sanctions and countermeasures against the United States, and there was a bit lot of kickback against that online, saying, "Oh no, that's not the case. What is your source?" Of course, I have sources who talk to me, people in the European Parliament who are on these committees, which are trying to get ahead of this remarkable situation, where a dog that the Europeans always believed intellectually they had on a leash has broken from that leash now and is gnawing away at a significant territory, which is the fiefdom, if you like. Because remember, George, if you look, and I wrote about this as well, if you look at the history of Greenland, the history of the abuse of the indigenous Inuit people by the Danes, right up until the 1980s, the Danish authorities were forcibly sterilizing young girls as young as 11 and 12 years of age, Inuit children. The people there were pushed into local industry. Their history and their culture was completely ground into dust for the crown. Remember, this is a royal country. This is the Danish monarchy. Remember as well, and as an Irishman and you as a Scotsman, I don't think we're great monarchists. And the remarkable sense for me right now is one of Schadenfreude, seeing this empire which propped itself up, the Europeans always with this faux sense of outrage and liberalism, the anti-war movement, which was completely decayed in Europe on the left, whereas now we see only an anti-war movement in Ukraine, particularly on the right, remarkably. To see them now running, charging about in the halls of power in Europe, wondering how they're going to pull the American, this Leviathan, this economic, military Leviathan back into line. That's the sense right now in Europe. And of course, in Moscow, in Beijing, again, yet again, those two great countries get to sit back and watch this machine essentially pull itself apart. It's quite remarkable.
Well, this comedian, Callas, who is our foreign minister, though we, of course, never elected her any more than we elected any of these panjandrums in the European Union, she at least got one thing right in her hopefully brief tenure as foreign minister. She said they are laughing in Moscow and in Beijing, and Schadenfreude, that wonderful German word, is of course entirely apt. Not that the Europeans are entirely without weapons to fire back. It turns out that Ozempic, 100% of Ozempic entering the United States comes from Denmark, and the Danes are warning as severely as they can to Mike Pompeo and all the others in the Washington class who are half the men they used to be. Thanks to Denmark and Ozempic, it's going to be stopped. They're not going to allow any more Ozempic to reach the shores of the United States. Maybe Danish bacon, maybe French fries, or freedom fries, we might rename them, will be stopped. But this joke, Dad's Army, it's actually funnier than Dad's Army, of the expeditionary force that's been sent. Now we learn from Bild, the 15 Germans in the joke are no longer, they have been recalled. They're not going to fight, are they? They're going to, as the Russian statesman Medvedev said, they're going to shit their pants and surrender. That's obvious, isn't it?
Look, I mean, it's hard to keep a straight face while you watch this happening. It's akin to having these neighbors who are, the people first into church on a Sunday, kids who do so well in school, never, raise a voice on a New Year's Eve, and suddenly you see them beating each other up in the front garden. It's hard to take your your eyes off this as it occurs. And I've been watching it very closely, particularly the attempts at harmony. The European Union sort of issued a joint statement. Antonio Costa, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the usual stock drivel. We stand with Greenland and its people. We stand with the people of Denmark. Now, of course, they didn't stand with the indigenous people of Denmark. They don't stand with the people of Crimea, for example, who voted for autonomy from Ukraine. They don't stand with the people of Donbass, Donetsk. They don't stand with the Serbs, whose territory was carved up, as you say, and stolen from them to make an outpost within the heartland of the Serbian people, theft of the territory. They didn't stand with the people in Yugoslavia when their energy systems were bombed, destroyed, attacked, targeted, water treatment plants. And they don't stand with the people of Ukraine today as they're dragged from the street and sent to die in a perpetually failing proxy war. So what I see as the reality of where we are right now is the management of this collapse. How are they going to try to reverse themselves into some sort of plausible position? Regarding the deployment of the troops, George, I mean, whoever thought that this could possibly be a good idea, it reminded me of Winston Churchill. You know, the lack of statesmen. Whatever you think of Churchill, he was a great leader for Britain during the Second World War. The abject lack of statesmanship and the lack of people to step up to the plate now, while the European Union and NATO face their greatest challenges since their inception, is really remarkable to see. It's conspicuous by its absence. And as you mentioned, Kaja Kallas, this essentially diversity hire from the Minnow state of Estonia, who only knows how to hate Russia. That's the only reason she ever got her job, was because she hated Russia so much, despite being the daughter of the Soviet elite, and despite the fact that her husband made millions after the Russian intervention in 2022 with his transport company until he was caught by a newspaper. These people are completely vacuous morally, and when it comes to the crunch, they have nothing to say. You would imagine that if they were serious about the territorial integrity of Greenland or Denmark, they would immediately have done what Margaret Thatcher did in 1982, correct me if I'm wrong, and dispatch a large-scale force halfway around the globe, as Margaret Thatcher did. And again, as an Irishman, I have no particular graw or love for Margaret Thatcher. You, as a man who defended the miners, will not either. But regardless of that, we have to try and be objective. She was a leader who was true to her word. She was advised not to do it, but she dispatched this force. The Europeans have sent less than 20 men each, 15 of which have scurried away under the cover of night to come back as soon as Mr. Merz was faced with the reality of $15 billion a year in sanctions from the United States of America. It's quite remarkable. And as we say, only in the crucible and the furnace of these really difficult situations do people come to the fore. Maybe we should put people like Robert Fico and Viktor Orban at the head of the negotiation here, because the reality is, and the dogs on the street know in Europe, in NATO HQ and everywhere else, that if Donald Trump wants Greenland, he's having Greenland, whether he buys it, seizes it, or takes it through economic subjugation or blockade. And again, this is something that the United States has been doing since the end of the Second World War globally. And I've written this recently too, and this is important in my view. What we're seeing now is the empire of Trump. We're seeing the United States overtly do what it's covertly been doing for decades, George, as you well know, and many of our viewers will know. Operation Condor in South America, the overt and covert operations in the Middle East, the destruction of Iranian democracy, very current now, Mohammad Mossadegh's government destroyed in 1953. This playbook has been going on, but it's been conveniently done covertly. So the European elites who've coalesced with the American empire have been able to pretend it wasn't happening. But now they are on the menu. They're not at the table anymore. They're on the menu. They're on the platter, about to be consumed by this monstrous creation, which is unable to be brought to heel. The Europeans have hollowed themselves out. They've economically, militarily, And politically, there is no leadership with which to stand up that anybody of the ilk of Donald Trump would consider or listen to. He doesn't respect the Europeans. And that's why he feels he can bite the biggest chunk of its territory off and stand there and say, what are you going to do about it? And the reality is they're going to do nothing.
It's tragicomic because this European continent was the king of the road. First the Portuguese, then the Spanish, then of course preeminently the British, but with some also Rands, with a colony or 2 or 5 or 10, but also Rands. This European hegemony, which dominated the world for 500 years, is now crashing and burning in ruins. Their own metropolitan heartlands are a husk, a shadow of their former selves, unrecognizable as their former selves, their economies crashing and burning, and yet we're asked to believe that Russia wants to end the war in Ukraine, America wants to end the war in Ukraine, but it cannot be allowed to end because of this Europe that is burning, literally as well as metaphorically. What does all this mean for the end of the conflict and the end of the agony of the peoples of the Ukraine?
Yeah, and of course, everything is linked on this global chessboard. Everything is linked. And what this really shows us is the lack of sincerity in any, when it comes to any sort of positioning of the European Union, the lack of unity, the lack of sincerity in their desire to end the conflict in Ukraine, a conflict that they were hyper aggressive in cultivating, propagating, and igniting, of course, along with their American counterparts, to the biggest part in the Maidan. Now, that civil war has rolled on, but now, of course, we see that this sort of obfuscation by Europe about even sending peacekeeping forces. We've seen this. Now we see what happens in Denmark when territory is actually about to be seized. They've sent less than 20 men apiece. The reality that Ukraine has been used as a somewhat willing patsy in its own country to try to inflict what is widely known as a desired strategic defeat on Russia. The RAND Corporation wrote the rule book about this. They told us exactly what they were going to do, how to unbalance Russia via Ukraine. We've known this since the Second World War. So what does it mean for Ukraine, what we see happening now? What it means is it obviously, in my view, emboldens Russia somewhat to the point where it reinforces the reality that Russia doesn't and shouldn't need to seek the permission of the European Union, which has demonstrated itself now beyond any sort of doubt as an utterly morally vacuous talking shop, which is only really concerned with the pensions of its unelected bureaucracy. It's also become an a la carte authority on things like the brutal treatment of the Ukrainian people by the dictatorship, which is Mr. Zelensky's unelected government. We've seen the gross corruption, the golden toilet. Today, I read Ukrainian journalist Diana Panchenko writing about the head of the SBU, the secret police. They're stealing $10 million a month. An ex-colleague of Mr. Zelensky's from his Kvartal 95 production company. This stuff is flushing out of Ukraine daily. Meanwhile, the ski slopes of Ukraine are full of the elites of this grotesque elites from this country stealing billions of dollars of hard-working European and American workers' money. It's absolutely grotesque. So I don't see how anybody now, even the most radical anti-Russian, could suggest that the Europeans have any moral authority remaining. And to me, this is a significant hollowing out and a quickening, if you like, of the collapse of the European Union and of NATO, something that I've predicted. None of these empires can persist indefinitely. And certainly an empire that won't defend its borders, George, refuses to defend its borders, is certainly doomed. As we saw with Margaret Thatcher, as I say, she dispatched this armada, whether you agree with her politically or not, the will for anybody in Europe to demonstrate, or in NATO indeed, to demonstrate that they're serious and to make Donald Trump think seriously about a stone in his shoe is completely absent. It's a vacuum. And inside that vacuum is a mirror. And the mirror tells us that everything that they've said to us about Yugoslavia, about Russia, about China, about the threat from abroad, the threat from outside, this garden that they're outside the European Union is a jungle, when they've created a jungle within Europe, where they vilified people like Orban, like Fico, like Babiš in the Czech Republic. This is the reality that we're seeing now. And many of us, me included, are enjoying it to some extent, the vindication of the reality that the European Union only ever talked a great game. It was never going to actually be serious about the defending the rights of anybody, least of all the frozen wastes of Greenland, which we know will, as a matter of course now, become American.
Well, you didn't disappoint, as always. A brilliant tour of the horizon. We didn't manage to reach Tony Blair or even the alien life that Donald Trump is about to unveil, or maybe these are the same things. Chay Bowes in Moscow, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let me take a quick break, then I'm going to Port Talbot. Who wouldn't? Where Paul wants to talk about Donald Trump, not to be missed. Stay tuned. Let's go to our old friend Declan in Dublin, who's online too. Go ahead, Declan.
Right, George. There's a very big protest in the town of Chay Bowes, the last Christian village on the West Bank. If they lose this, they are finished in the Holy Land. I'd like to take the chance to salute Francesca Albanese, who is the greatest woman, I think, of our generation. And the hope is that there are other Francesca Albaneses out there who will do something, because the Western churches, the Catholic Church especially, and the other main churches are doing absolutely nothing for their co-religionists in the Holy Land, just like they did nothing for them in Syria or in Iraq.
They don't even talk about them, never mind do anything. And all these Christian politicians, and all these Christian leaders, and most of the Christian clergy haven't done or said even jack to come to their aid. They're not Christians, most of these politicians. When they say they're Christians, better count your spoons, or better still, count the burning Christian houses.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Still 0-0 in the AFCON final for those following it, like me and my son Zayn, even though it's the middle of the night here. We are coming to you live, well, almost live, almost dead, in the middle of the night from Hong Kong, about which more later. Let's go first to Paul in Port Talbot in Wales, which will, I suspect, soon be an independent Wales, to talk about Donald Trump. On you go, Paul.
Good evening, George. So first of all, my best to you and your family. You know the world's gone mad when Tony Blair joins the Gaza peace board. I mean, this is absolute nonsense. But Donald Trump, first it was Venezuela, then it was the brutal, senseless murder of Renee Good, and now it's Greenland. So all these are plot devices to distract the world from the Epstein files. Is there anybody with the guts and the balls to stand up to this man and say enough is enough?
I don't think so. And although he's wasting away, I think physically, medically, as well as cognitively, and of course he's going the way of all human flesh. He's not a young man, he's not a well man, but he's still twice the man of the pygmies who confront him in the United States of America. So I think not. He will continue to rampage at least until the parliamentary elections, congressional elections, midterm, where a part of the Congress is up for re-election next November. And if a week is a long time in politics, from January to November, and they don't take office to the following January, so a full calendar year before a new Congress assembles, I think he will continue this rampage. He'll kill all before him until he's stopped. Our good friend Brian Berletic puts it better than anyone else. I saw it again today. I saw him say it a week or two ago. To appeal to the better nature of an empire is as useless as appealing to the raging river to somehow spare your house, spare your town in this torrent that is tearing and sweeping all before it. It is pointless. The river will destroy you unless you can defend yourself. Unless you can defend yourself. And you and your allies can defend yourself. And these are the crucial lessons which emerge from this. Who now will doubt that the only person that got it right was the reviled and ridiculed Kim Jong-il and his father before him? But for the existence of nuclear weapons, the deluge would have taken North Korea away with them. And that it hasn't is testament only to the fact that if you can't defend yourself, you will be swept away. Now, I can take comments on YouTube. Scan the QR code now. Leave a comment on the YouTube stream. Excuse me. Atif Khan says the Kalalite are the indigenous Inuit people native to Greenland who are from America. Well, there you go. The Uyghur approach used against China is now being used against Denmark. Cam 35mm says Canada kidnapped native children and put them in these re-education schools. I'm terribly sorry about this. And Bam Balai 7 says the USA will buy Greenland with monopoly money. And Von Saltinator, what a great name, says Israel has killed more Palestinians than the entire population of Greenland. Why is the EU not as outraged by that as they are by being offered a sales receipt for a floating snowball? And Cardboard Box 89 says Trump has succeeded thus far in keeping the Epstein files out of sight because of the chaos and bluster he has been creating. Epstein files? What Epstein files? Who's Jeffrey Epstein? Stephen Lewis says Trump wants to return the Shah to Iran, but not George Galloway to England. What a very good point. Online one is Eve in Florida on the US and Greenland. Eve, welcome.
Thank you for having me on your great show. Well, I want to say something a little bit different about Greenland, if I may. The main asset of Donald Trump is the low IQ of European leaders. But the main cards are in European hand, assuming that the goal of Donald Trump is to keep United States the number one power in the world. Because if America loses Europe, and let's say even get Greenland, they lose all their projecting power. They use most of their ability to defend Israel. And this is what, and also Europe has a golden opportunity to solve the Ukraine crisis, because the Ukraine crisis is just two things. Is the mistreatment of the Donbas population, and the bigger thing is the NATO problem. And if Europeans say, well, we are done with NATO, I would say 3/4 of the Ukraine problem goes away. So they rebuild the Nord Stream, they close the US base, they tell the US that they know that Israel is all behind this Greenland affair. Now it's Colonel McGregor and Jean Célineau on French YouTube explained that the grandson of Estée Lauder, Ronald Lauder, is all in. He was the head of the Jewish Congress, so he's very, very political. He's all in to give Greenland to US, maybe as a reward for the Epstein story, to cover it up, we don't know. But Europe has all the cards. But we have, of course, a government in Europe which has been put in place by the US. And that's the problem. But otherwise, they have all the cards. That's what I'm trying to say. Yes.
Yeah, you've said it well. Of course, Europe barely has governments now at all. All the important decisions are made by the entirely unelected people in Brussels, which, as Chay Bowes was just pointing out, actually a quarter of their time is spent feathering their own nests. And that's just that we know of. The illicit feathering of the nest might well be taking up even more of their time. The European economy is going to hell in a handcart. The British, here in Hong Kong, I have lost count of the number of British people that I have met that have fled Britain. They are literally adrift. They have no intention of going back to a country that is quite clearly going down the drain. In contrast, of course, with the boom of Hong Kong and indeed the territories just across the bay in the People's Republic of China proper. It will be some years before that happens here in Hong Kong, but already the China factor is vivid everywhere. So people are fleeing Europe because they can see that it has no future, that the sun is setting on Europe. And some in the rest of the world will say, not before time. So the best thing they could do is drop their objection to peace in Ukraine, rebuild their own economies, reopen the Nord Stream pipeline. But these politicians, none of them, are able to do that because they have built their entire political careers on the very opposite of that. Even Florida, thank you very much. We've had a big raft of donors this week, so a big thank you to them. Those who visited the moats.tv website included Kerry Pay, Ricardo Salavesa, Robert McKinnon, George J. Ashkar Jr., and Aristophanes Souliklias. Aristophanes Souliklias. Thank you very much indeed, every one of you, for your handsome donations. And even if your donation cannot be handsome, you are obligated really to make it. Otherwise, I'm getting up here for no pay in the middle of the night, providing this show for you, and you're freeloading on it. And I don't think that's a good look. It shouldn't be a good feel. Let's go to New York, where John is ashamed of America. Well, don't worry, John. We've been ashamed of our countries for a very long time. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, George. I'm a proud student in the Global University, paying tuition monthly on Patreon. I am.
Thank you.
Not so much of my country, George. I'm more ashamed of my vote, and quite simply, I guess you already answered my question, because I was going to ask you if you had ever felt the same. I myself feel like I'm stuck in a song by Bob Dylan called "Subterranean Homesick Blues" in 1965, because I'm watching Miriam Adelson mix the medicine in the basement, and I'm on the pavement here in New York thinking about the government. Trump clearly does indeed need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, and the damn oil pump doesn't work because the vandals did take the handle. It's just I'm living, and I got to tell you, George, if I sound upset, it's because I really am deep down. I may be a complete unknown like a Rolling Stone, but I guarantee you I am not alone. And there's a lot of us who voted for Trump. This will not stand. This indeed will not stand. I thank you. God bless you. My prayers are with you and your family and all this nonsense that you're dealing with right now. Take care, George.
Thank you kindly, John. If we get a better call than that this evening, we'll be very lucky indeed. Not least because this day is the 62nd anniversary of Bob Dylan's release of the album Times They Are A-Changing. Well, they're taking a hell of a long time to change, Bob. The prevailing orthodoxies that you were singing about so well at that time are still extant, at least in the failing corners of the world. It is indeed Subterranean Homesick Blues. I thought you were going to mention another one. I feel like I'm stuck inside of Mobile with the Homesick Blues again. I think I'm going to have to pay twice to get out of going through all this twice. Let me take a quick break so I can clear my throat. I'll be right back. I think you don't have to worry about these things with Mamdani, because my overwhelming feeling is that Mamdani is a phony. He has as much intention of doing these things as, you know, I compare him to a figure in British Labour history who became briefly famous in the US when Joe Biden was found to have plagiarized him during a presidential run some decades ago. But that man's name was Neil Kinnock. He used to talk all this flowery, far left guff like Mamdani does, but he had no intention whatsoever of actually doing anything about it, of doing any of it. So there's no chance whatsoever that Mamdani is going to defund the New York Police Department.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Is ICE Trump's personal Gestapo? Yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, X, YouTube community poll, YouTube stream, and on Patreon. And pretty overwhelmingly, the audience thinks the answer is in the affirmative. My apologies for misquoting the great Bob Dylan on such an auspicious anniversary as the 62nd birthday of the great album, The Times They Are A-Changing. Of course, Bob was thinking that he'd have to pay to get out of going through all this twice. Dr. Annelle Rodriguez Sheline, now regular guest on the show because she's so good and because she's so popular. She's a former State Department and research fellow of the Middle East at the Quincy Institute. A woman of many parts and a woman who knows her stuff and can talk cogently about them. Dr. Annelle, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Good to see you again. Hard to know where to start. Let's start with Greenland. Are you going to war with the 5 Italians, 15 French and 1 Englishman who are the last remaining elements in the defense force of Greenland, Germany having pulled its 15 soldiers out? I mean, even Rorke's Drift had, in the film Zulu, had more defenders than Greenland has. I mean, is Trump really going to do this?
It's very hard to say. I do worry that, as other people have noted, Trump seems to be high on his own supply in terms of what he perceives as the successful kidnapping of Maduro and his wife from Venezuela. Similar previous military actions that he had conducted, for example, in his first term, the killing of Qasem Soleimani in early 2020 in Iran. Both of these are instances where he used military force illegally to complete an objective, and as a result, thus far at least, has not had to face significant consequences. And so I worry that Trump thinks that he could do something like take Greenland and face zero consequences.
Well, he may be right, of course. I mean, the bully doesn't stop until he's stopped. And nobody yet has stopped him. He killed Soleimani in the first term. He has kidnapped Maduro and his wife. He has butchered Gaza, put Tony Blair back in charge of it. Imagine that. He has bombed the Iranians. He has effectively cowed all of his adversaries except Russia and except China on the economic level. So are we seeing now the foundations or the architecture of what will be the new world order, that the rest will be America's and the hinterland, the near abroad of Russia will be Russia's, and the Southeast Asian theater will be China's? Is that what we're seeing now, a kind of Orwellian Eurasia, Oceania, and so on? Is that what's now, even if Trump doesn't know that he's doing exactly that, what is actually happening?
I mean, I know that that is how some interpret this idea of kind of the Franklin Roosevelt spheres of influence idea, that you'd have the United States controlling the Western Hemisphere and other great powers controlling their various regions. But if you look at the national security strategy, for example, the language he uses does not in any way indicate that he's going to allow China to sort of operate within its own sphere of influence in East Asia. It maintains this idea that the United States has a right to military primacy, that the America's presence in East Asia is absolutely fundamental to U.S. security, and that will continue. So I'm fairly skeptical of those who perceive what Trump is doing now with this more aggressive approach to the Western Hemisphere as signaling that he will somehow be less aggressive elsewhere.
Well, let's take them country by country, or region by region at least. He certainly has succeeded in Venezuela. He has kidnapped the president and his wife. He has terrorized. He has extorted hundreds of millions from Venezuelans, from Venezuela's now government, the successor government, if you like, to Nicolas Maduro. 500 million of which is sitting apparently in a private bank account in Qatar. And of course, good luck to ever seeing anything of that money. Of course, the words of defiance are still spoken from Caracas, but the actions are the opposite of defiance. Venezuela has clearly cut a deal with the devil to avoid being Libyanized, to avoid being torn apart. That's what's happened, isn't it?
Certainly. And this, as I was saying, Trump sort of interprets as a success that he was able to go in and kidnap Maduro and has thus far faced very few repercussions other than think pieces bemoaning the end of the international order, which they're not wrong about that. But as far as any consequences that Trump has faced. Although I do think, for example, shifting back to the Middle East, which is my area of focus, I do think that even if we're not seeing countries that are overtly making moves against the United States, which is obviously the strongest military power in the world by a factor of, I think our military, I think, is stronger than the next 11 countries combined. So it is understandable that we're not seeing countries that are willing to take on not only the might of the US military, but in the hands of someone like Trump. But when you look, for example, at the behavior of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, pushing back against this incursion by these Emirati-backed forces that in early December had seized much of the former South Yemen, and then we saw those forces all being pushed back by the Saudi-backed forces, who have now consolidated their control of southern Yemen, and at Saudi Arabia's insistence, as well as through the internationally recognized government in Yemen, insisted that the Emirati-backed force known as the Southern Transitional Council, or the STC, that they had to disband themselves, and the leader of that fled to Abu Dhabi. And so this was part of a broader project by the UAE along with Israel, which was trying to work in various strategic environments, including in southern Yemen, including in Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, the Horn of Africa, to try to consolidate strategic territory and also to push back against Islamist governments or any government that the UAE and Israel saw as being hostile or opposed to it. And so what's interesting is now you have, I think the UAE probably thought that it would be permitted to do whatever it wanted because it's aligned with Israel. Whereas in contrast, you have Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Oman, Turkey certainly gathering together and saying, no, we are not interested in a regional order where the UAE and Israel are allowed to destabilize governments at will and sort of reshape, move fast and break things, reshape the regional order in the way that they see fit. So although this is not directly pushing back against Donald Trump, I do think that you will see mid-level powers in other parts of the world that will continue to pursue their own interests and will not simply sit back and allow something like what we saw taking place in Yemen. Unfortunately, what's happening in Sudan continues to be horrific atrocities backed by both Saudi Arabia on one side and the UAE on the other.
Let's segue then into the main reason why we asked you on, though your international purview is vast, and that is I think it's farcical. You may think it could work. I mean, we have a board of peace, most of whom are rich and Jewish, who have been established by Donald Trump as the new governors of Gaza. And of course, for us on the British side of the ocean, we cannot take our eyes off the fact that the man who should be in prison, Tony Blair, is now one of the governors of Gaza. What do you make of all this and its prospect of success?
Well, I do think that when the news got out that Trump wants nations to pay $1 billion in order to stay on his peace board, and that very quickly got a lot of pushback. I think the idea being that they could join, but then if they wanted to stay on the board, they had to pay $1 billion each. And that the concern there was that it seemed that Trump was perhaps trying to install his own version of an alternate United Nations that he would control, and that also he would control this vast amount of theoretical money, although thus far no entity, to my knowledge, has been willing to put up $1 billion of its own dollars in order to join this club. But to your point about Tony Blair, obviously it is extremely alarming. And sorry, I should clarify. So the group of nations, or what Trump was wanting countries to contribute to, was the sort of broader board of peace, for I think, again, kind of seen as this like world entity. And I think he'd invited people like Argentina's Javier Milei. I think Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney was invited. I believe Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt. And that is in contrast to the Gaza Board of Peace, I believe. That was the intention there, is to rebuild Gaza, that Blair is part of. It has, I'm just trying to look here to kind of clarify if these are the same. I mean, this is all sort of it's only just coming, or this has only been recently announced, and so there's also the announcement of a separate 15-member Palestinian Technocratic Committee, and then there's the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, and there are certainly international figures from the UN that have been named to be part of this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, such as Nikolai Mladenov, who's a Bulgarian politician and former UN Middle East envoy. But I mean, the takeaway, certainly from the inclusion of Tony Blair, as well as these other individuals from Jared Kushner to Steve Witkoff participating, is this seems largely like just another opportunity for Trump to try to accrue more wealth to himself. And similar to the funds from Venezuela that are now in a Qatari bank account, as you mentioned, I am extremely skeptical that any of this would ever go to the people of Gaza or to Palestinians. And instead, this would merely line the pockets of Trump and his family.
Well, you say the people of Gaza, Doctor, but does all of this not presuppose that there will be no people of Gaza, that somehow they will no longer be there? Because how are these panjandrums and ghost figures and countries, how are they going to administer Gaza? With whose army? How many divisions does Jared Kushner control? How many American soldiers are going to be put into the maw in the Gaza Strip? We've seen the turnout of the armed forces in Greenland. Frankly, if you ask the public in most countries, do you want to send your soldiers into the Gaza Strip? Most of them would throw their hands up in horror. So unless there's power behind this, then the people will have to be removed, won't they? And to where and how can they be removed or be persuaded to remove themselves?
To your final point, my sense is that Israel continues to try to persuade them to remove themselves by not allowing in aid, not allowing any sort of permanent shelter. You know, the number of children and even adults perhaps who have died of exposure or hypothermia as a result of not having any sort of adequate shelter at a time when I read there were 80-mile-per-hour winds in Gaza. I mean, it's a horrific winter. It's January. I'm really horrified that following the announcement of the so-called ceasefire deal or the 20-point plan in early October, that the world's attention really has shifted so far away from Gaza, and especially the mainstream media continuing to refer to it as a ceasefire. And you look at how many people have been killed. It's an average of one child each day. That's only the children. That's not including adults. In contrast, you think about the ongoing awful violence in Ukraine. However, just looking at the scale of it, acknowledging that there is still a war happening, that there are still casualties on both sides in Ukraine. And in contrast, there's allegedly a ceasefire in Gaza, despite, again, these ongoing airstrikes and continuing refusal by Israel to adhere to phase one, so-called phase one of the plan, which was supposed to bring in 600 trucks of aid every single day, allowing in these, just the basics necessary for life. So to get back to your questions, I fear that in the very likely event that we do not see an international stabilization force materialize, as you said, what country would want to send its own soldiers to fight and die and occupy Gaza? The various Muslim majority countries that Trump initially crowed that were involved with the announcement of this plan, places like Turkey and Malaysia, none of these countries have been willing to contribute troops to this scheme, because it is very clear that it is not, in fact, a peace plan. It is a plan for the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza. So my fear is that instead we'll see Israel simply being allowed to continue its military campaign, and that will also have American military contractors. As you said, it's unlikely that Trump would put U.S. service members or actual troops on the ground, and instead will pay vastly more in terms of U.S. taxpayer dollars to pay American military contractors.
Well, quite. I mean, we were just the other day in Malaysia. I was discussing with members of the Malaysian government, high-ranking members. I mean, they were prepared to send soldiers. But of course, Israel doesn't want that kind of soldier. They don't want soldiers from countries like Malaysia that are supportive of the Palestinian cause, because those soldiers would quickly become a potential problem, like the peacekeepers used to be regularly in Lebanon, a problem for Israel. So they won't accept Turkish soldiers. Netanyahu already said that. The fear of Muslim armies coming into Gaza is that this will be, if you like, a Trojan horse for the Palestinians. So I think they're doomed to an army of highly paid mercenaries, and we know where that kind of thing ends. We saw it in the mercenaries who were distributing the aid and killing dozens of people every day in the food queues. So it just seems to me that Trump is building castles in the air here that will never actually come to pass. And meanwhile, the Palestinian agony will continue.
Certainly. And as you said, those military contractors that were involved in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which itself is now defunct, but many of those same people are redeployed and are operating now near Gaza in preparation for whatever this next phase is going to be. On the one hand, while obviously we, as you said, we saw the outcome of having American mercenaries in charge of humanitarian aid distribution, the bloody outcomes that produced. On the other hand, I hope that could, in between two bad outcomes, I think I would rather have the United States maintaining some involvement as opposed to Trump just throwing up his hands and telling Israel to do whatever they want, because we know what that looks like. So although, again, these are not great outcomes at all, and I certainly agree with you that this initial idea that we might have various Muslim countries around the world that would send soldiers to provide this stabilization force, although not ideal, we did have the UN Security Council vote to authorize something like this, because I think it was hoped that that would be preferable, to have something like a version of UN peacekeepers coming in to protect Palestinians from Israeli brutality. And instead, I do worry that as countries take these steps back and they don't want to be involved in occupation, obviously, the alternative is simply Israel continues the genocide. And at some point, I fear that we'll shift from this sort of slow genocide as a result of exposure and inadequate nutrition and return to the very fast and active genocide of Israel bombing everything it can and simply killing as many Palestinians as it can. And as we've already seen, we know the world is not going to do anything to stop it.
Now, finally, Doctor, and I'm grateful for your time, and as someone formerly in government until you took a principled stand and left it, the obvious intention to attack Iran was there last week. You don't move all these military assets. You don't make the kind of maneuvers that were made if it is not at least in your plan to launch another attack. It never happened. And some say that Netanyahu, through Putin, asked that it should not happen because Israel was not ready to deal with the inevitable Iranian response. What's your take on the current state of affairs between the US, Israel, and Iran?
I'm skeptical that it would have been Netanyahu who asked that the US not intervene, because Netanyahu has been pushing for the United States to fight Iran on Israel's behalf for decades. And on my understanding of what Netanyahu asked for when he came to visit Trump at the end of December was reiterating not that they needed to go after the nuclear facilities, because again, those were bombed and it is unclear what survives after that, but to go after the missile facilities. But that's different. It's harder to hit the missile facilities. You can move them around. And then in fact that the outbreak of these mass protests in Iran may have actually delayed that outcome, that a decision had been made. The United States wanted to get out ahead, that apparently Trump didn't like that in June when he attacked Iran, it was seen more as kind of Israel's victory, such as it was. And he wanted to be out in front this time. And so my sense of who would have been the actors reining him in, I imagine it's people like Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who is really trying to focus on Vision 2030 because he has bet his crown on it, on this economic transformation that he has promised his people. And other GCC countries, like whether it's Qatar, the UAE, I think, is probably more in keeping with whatever Israel wants. But you think about how much money the Saudis, the Qataris, you think of the massive jet the Qataris gave to Trump when he visited last May. They've paid a lot in bribes to try to get the outcomes they want. And so I could imagine when there was all this posturing that the United States seemed to be about to attack, that you had MBS or Amir Tamim or other Kuwaiti or Omani leaders, also Turkey perhaps, coming in and saying, look, this would be terrible for the region. There was also reporting from the Wall Street Journal that apparently someone clarified to Trump that even if he did bomb, it was not clear that that would lead to collapse of the regime, which seems like an obvious thing that he should have known, but that perhaps also swayed him. So I'm skeptical of anyone who says they think it was Netanyahu reining Trump in, because I'm fairly certain Netanyahu has been wanting this for quite a long time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Annelle Rodriguez Sheline, as always, for that tour of the horizon. Let's take a quick break and then your calls right up to Gayatri's social media news roundup. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. as vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
It's irresistible. Let's go to Mike in South Dakota on aliens and UFOs. I can't resist it. It's one of my passions. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so a long time ago, I found this person called Bill Cooper, and he had a radio show called Hour of the Time, and he used to thoroughly investigate abductions, UFOs, aliens, the whole thing, to try and get to the truth. Like, what is the truth? Like, what's really going on here? And he was like a top-notch journalist, really. I think he was. He was in 3 branches of the military, and when he was in military intelligence, he like made reports for the commander of the Pacific Fleet, and you can see all this in his military records. This guy, he was for real. And he used to bring people out to Area 51. Like, he'd bring groups out there, and they would watch these craft fly up and, down and do impossible things that, none of our craft that is admitting, can do. And they burnt a radio station down to silence Bill Cooper during Waco. And he wrote a book, Behold a Pale Horse. And basically, Bill Cooper warned about everything that we're seeing right now, the whole New World Order thing, and he really thoroughly discusses the whole alien invasion thing. Like these are plans. These are things that they have planned. So I don't know. It's
right at this point, Mike, I'm kind of hoping that the aliens will land and resolve some of the pressing problems that we face before we destroy God's green earth entirely. So I'm not hostile to an alien invasion. After all, what could be more alien than what we're seeing from the Donald Trump presidency right at this moment? That scares me far more than the prospect of a flying saucer landing and a little green man toddling out. Kind of couldn't be worse from my point of view. But the story now is that Trump is imminently about to reveal that some time past the United States had encounters of the third kind, had strange encounters of the third kind, so much so that the Bank of England has been warned to take prophylactic measures to avoid crashing of the currency, which they imagine will be one of the consequences of the revelation, capital R, that we are about to get. I'm up for it, open to it, have absolutely no wish to turn my face against it. When the facts change, so do my opinions. as Groucho Marx said. Now, if you've missed any of tonight's show, you can, of course, catch up with the Moats podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. This week, we're in the top 10 for politics in Pakistan, Kuwait, and Nigeria. The top 30 for politics in South Africa, UAE, Croatia, and the top 50 for the first time, I believe, in Japan. You can listen to the weekly podcast, of course, also on the moats.tv website. And when you're there, please leave your donation. Amir is in Dubai on Iran and the US. Amir, welcome.
Dear George, hi. It's always a great pleasure speaking with you, and I hope you're doing well.
Thank you, brother.
I wanted to say that isn't it clear already that the war on Iran has already been declared? Since the EU and the US, they all say the same thing, that the numbers are limited for Iran, and that if Trump didn't attack Iran already, it's because he's pulling his forces out of Qatar and surrounding bases, and called the strike group the aircraft carriers to come towards Middle East, so that there will be less damage from the retaliation of Iran to the US, and that they're just waiting for the strike groups to arrive and then attack Iran. And I'm just...
Well, the strike groups are definitely on their way, Amir. They're headed for the Mediterranean now. And you don't do that if you have taken off the table the idea of going back to war with Iran. So you're fairly convinced from where you are now that this war has merely been postponed, not cancelled, right?
So it's just it's just postponed for a bit until they're ready, and they're removing their forces from the bases in Qatar, and they removed their forces from Al Udeid air base and the bases in Iraq. So they're just trying to minimize the casualties or like the retaliation of Iran. And I don't understand why Iran doesn't take action before. Why do they always have to wait until they're attacked and they get a lot of damages before doing something about it? I wanted to take your take on it.
Yeah, this idea, of course, would be entirely legal. It would be absolutely legal for Iran to launch preemptive self-defense measures. It's abundantly clear that both Israel and the United States have hostile intentions against Iran, and the law allows, in those circumstances, the threatened party to launch preemptive military action. Of course, in so doing, you would regain the element of the advantage of surprise, but you would also guarantee that there's no diplomatic or negotiating way out of this. And I guess that Iran is still hoping that China and Russia will be able to pressure the United States into not launching what will be a devastating war. Devastating for Iran, yes, but devastating for the region, not least the place you're calling me from, and devastating most of all to Israel. You would have thought in a sane world that such a deal might be able to be hammered out, but then we are living in a lunatic asylum. Amir in Dubai, thank you for that call. Let me read some of the comments that are coming in from YouTube. Little Maisie says, thank you, Dr. Annelle, for more good information. Let's hope that there are Palestinian representatives involved in the decision-making about their future. And Nikia says, by what right does the US, etc., have to control and run Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine? What the hell is this? Nikia Olmo said. Well, of course they have no right, but then Britain had no right to give Palestine away to the Zionist movement in the first place. Britain had no right to control Palestine, no right to control Hong Kong, no right to control India, Africa. 35% of the population of the world. What right did we have to do that? What right did we have to control, own, and exploit 25% of the globe? Why are you talking about rights, Nakia? Isn't it long evident that rights are simply a social construct to obtain approval and quiescence from our public opinion and the public opinion of the world for whatever it is that our rulers have decided to do? We are manufacturing consent when we talk about rights. The only right that matters is your right to defend yourself and your intention so to do, and your willingness to make alliances that will facilitate you doing so. That's what North Korea have done. And it turns out that the butt of everybody's joke is not the butt after all. Kathy D says, I don't understand why Blair was dropped from the Gaza board in early December, but recently reinstated. Maybe he paid the money, Kathy. Maybe he promised the tribute in the end. Coffee23 says, the last time Blair was head of the peace quartet, Israel bombed Gaza almost daily with major bombing campaigns. 2008-9, 2012, and 2014. Don't I know it? And James Glass says, Blair makes Christopher Lee's Dracula look like Stan Laurel. Tony Dracula. He really does look evil. Well, it's like the portrait of Dorian Gray. In an attic in Downing Street, there is a portrait of Dorian Gray, a.k.o. Anthony Linton Blair. And although for a time he managed to keep that alter ego's, that's brilliant, that alter ego's vision out of public view, it was always there in the mirror. Let's go to New York, where Tom wants to talk about Ukraine. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, George. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I'm happy for United's win yesterday over City. I also wanted to talk to you about Artem.
Very important to me.
Yes, it was. Me too. Me too. I wanted to talk to you about Artem Dimitruk. He is a Ukrainian parliamentarian and is also a subdeacon in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He was jailed and beaten on Zelensky's orders in Ukraine, including 2 broken ribs. He fled to London. He is currently undergoing complex legal proceedings in the High Court in London. Zelensky wants to kill or imprison him, according to Dimitruk's X account. Why is he being persecuted? In an opinion piece that Dimitruk wrote for TASS in September 2025, he alleged that Zelensky's regime could be traced to the 2 attempted assassinations on Donald Trump during his re-election campaign in 2024 in Pennsylvania and Florida, as well as the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Quote, I'm saying this with full responsibility. In the attempt on Trump's life and in the assassination of Charlie Kirk, there's a trace of Zelensky, both ideologically and politically. End quote. I also wanted to note it's been 2 years since the death of American journalist Gonzalo Lira in a Ukrainian prison. But I wanted to focus about Artem Dimitruk and the persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Well, a very powerful call, Tom, and a subject well worth returning to, and I hope you'll help us to do that. I have no doubt that not just ideologically and politically, but I think there's a gunpowder trail leading back to the Zelensky regime in both of, or at least in one, for certain, of the assassination attempts against Trump. The one in Florida is obvious. The man on trial for the attempted assassination of Trump on the golf course from the Glade from the trees behind a grassy knoll, was very clearly up to his neck in Ukrainian political affairs. He was someone who had visited the Zelensky regime. He was a fundraiser and a political operative for the Zelensky regime. The prospect of Donald Trump as president was seen as extremely unhelpful to the Zelensky cause, as it in part has turned out to be, but only in part. But they feared that Trump would actually do what he said he would do and end the Ukraine war in 48 hours or a week or whatever it was. I forget now. That alleged assassin is very, as clearly as possibly could be, a partisan of the Zelensky regime's cause. And of course, in Butler, where it came closer, we have no idea who the hapless assassin was. I say assassin because, of course, he killed a brave firefighter sitting behind the platform in Donald Trump. So many people forget that. The people who were killed and wounded may or may not include Donald Trump. There's a lot of speculation that, well, things were not quite what they seemed to be. But thanks to the grace of God, his ear healed so very completely and so very quickly. But the attempted assassination was presumably real, and it took human life, and including the life of the alleged assassin, who was helpfully, you may think, neutralized after the shot had been made and before he could tell us anything about why he'd done this and about with whom he had done this, unless you're one of these who believes that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole gunman in Dallas, Texas in 1963, or you believe that this young man whose social media footprint is literally wiped and who appeared in a BlackRock commercial once upon a time as an even more callow youth, unless this man did this for no reason and left no reason why, then you have to assume that he was eliminated before anything could come out. So these two alleged assassins, of course, have nothing to do with Iran, nothing to do with Maduro. They are entirely either homegrown or Ukrainian linked. And of course, the Trump administration came to office telling us that no stone would be left unturned, but all the stones have been kept turned in the wrong direction. Bondingo and Patel, Cash Machine Patel, they came to office saying they would leave no stone unturned, but they did not unturn any stone. So that in itself is deeply suspicious. As to your Ukrainian prisoner, now in London, now a litigant in the High Court, I believe we should return in more detail to his story, and I hope you'll help us do that. Now, a big shout out to tonight's top donors who've been on to the moats.tv website since we came on air. You've been very generous this week. I'm very grateful to you, particularly Andrew Hoole, Giuliani Gustafsson, Lyra, Elaine Ryan, Douglas McFarlane. Douglas, you come up so often, and Kenneth Morris. Please check out the moats.tv website and scan the QR code right now to join the club. Let's go to Honduras. We don't often, where Bruce wants to talk about the Honduran elections. Very grateful for this call, Bruce. What would you like to say?
In the words of King George VIII to each of his 6 wives, Mr. Galloway, this won't be long. Presidential elections have been recently held in my country, and the 2 main candidates are of Palestinian descent. It just so happens that the one that won was the one that was backed by Donald Trump. And his first visit outside of the country was to Israel, where he was involved in many high-profile business meetings. Yes, a very concerning fact, especially concerning because he belongs to the political party of recently pardoned and convicted drug trafficker Juan Orlando Hernandez, who reportedly, and also speculatively, has been freed because of the influence of Peter Thiel and other tech bro millionaires who were buying up huge, vast stretches of land in my country to have miniature small kingdoms in which they have their own police, their own court system, and many people are saying that this is shaping up to be something like Epstein Island 2.0.
Yeah, I've heard that. One of my close colleagues is particularly active on this subject. You say he won the election, but did he really win the election? And who are these two Palestinians? And how should we categorize them? Please, Bruce, educate us.
Very well, Mr. Galloway. If you made a very good point in asking if he actually won. Well, that holds a lot of mystery, especially considering the fact that his first visit was to Israel and he was backed by Donald Trump. If I had to label him as a person, I would say he is a man with a soul of butter. He doesn't have much of a spine, and that's proven in the fact that he went to kiss the ring of Benjamin Netanyahu, who literally has been slaughtering the place of his ancestors. The other one could be categorized as a showman, something of a Javier Milei type, which is very popular here in Latin America. But I think when it comes to choice, we're a bit limited.
Well, clearly, but it is in itself fascinating that two Palestinians were vying for the presidency of Honduras, but both of them were entirely committed to kissing the ring and kissing the Roman wall with a skull cap on as their first port of call. Bruce, fascinating, tantalizing introduction to that subject. I promise you we will return to it. Meanwhile, let's go to Texas, where the Prince awaits, and he wants to talk about free speech and U.S. policy. Don't we all, Prince? Go ahead.
Hey, George, how you doing, sir? The good thing about the era we are living in right now is how blatant things are. The truth is, things have always been like this, The thing is that the veil has been taken off, so it's blatant. And about Greenland, I think that's the best thing that could ever happen. I hope Trump takes Greenland so that, because the Europeans have been pretty much, they've pushed themselves to irrelevance. They're basically useless. They've just been a lapdog vessel state of, whatever our government or the government here is doing, and which the government here is basically a lapdog to the Zionist regime. So basically, the Europeans are useless. And so you can see how much they have invested into Ukraine, even though it's against their interests, but they're pushing it because they have no backbone. So I love exactly what's going on. I hope they take over Greenland so that, they can understand the pain of the Venezuelan people, they can understand the pain of everybody else. And just also talking about free speech. You always hear the reference here, especially in the United States, North Korea, Iran. I keep on asking, why is Iran a regime but Saudi Arabia isn't? Why is Iran a regime but the UAE is not?
Yeah.
And, talk about...
That is a perennial question, Prince. When you qualify to lose the tag regime, then we know that you have sold yourself in your entirety. I have to hurry you on only because there's a legend on the line. It is the legend of New York. It is Erebos. Erebos, welcome back to the show. What's your take on these extraordinary times?
Salutations and greetings, Mr. G. Much health and power to Clan Galloway. looking forward to seeing Mrs. Gayatri Galloway ever since her magnum opus of Sykes-Picot and the insights into Africa and Indonesia. I've become hooked on her segments. So not seeing her the past 2 weeks, and her apparel, it has left somewhat of a dark spot into Moats. I hope you get some rest, and I hope you you get your health up. There's only one George Galloway. The world will still be a dumpster fire, hellscape, shite pit when you come back. So, but make sure and don't burn a hole through your system, because we need you here for as long as you could be. You still got 92-year-olds running around spry and strong. So, we need you up sprier and stronger. So, just to segue into it, shout out to Jai the Magnificent, first of her name, well planted in life. I wanted to mention something about power dynamics, because everything, even personal relationships, are rooted in power dynamics. But this guy, Stephen Miller, who, physically he is a pathetic, pulsating protoplasmic pulp of pus. He's nobody in terms of, and he's been that way his entire existence, which drives these guys' psychopathy. But he did say something that I think people not really paying enough attention to. He said, we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, he was talking to Jake, Jake the Snake, the reporter guy, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. Now, that is true. That is absolutely true. And I always strive to look for and be, as much as I can, a moral force of power. But power has nothing to do with morality, as we've discussed prior. In the case of yourself and the Workers' Party, for instance, and people like Ibrahim Traore and the triumvirate there in Mali and Niger, that's morality with power, and that's what's fundamentally missing, even with a lot of analysts and YouTubers and activists. There are people, they want other people to suffer, right? They want you to take the hit. They want your family to take the hit. They don't want to put any skin in the game, all of these analysts. And it's nothing personal against them, because many of them I know and have met. But, they complain so much, analysis paralysis, about what's wrong with the world, but they don't seem to accept that there's a power dynamic, and power is always taken. In the case of the peaceful means that are left by the electorate, via the plebiscite, as in the UK, as you've said, if people want you back in the UK, they're going to have to vote for you. But when that falls away, if it does fall away, then you're just left with violent revolution, as peaceful revolution is no longer an option, as JFK hinted to or stated. So the point is, go ahead, Mr. G, if you want to say something. I don't want to, overrun you.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you. Kennedy himself made that point. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable.
Indeed. And finally, because time is always against us, as Morpheus said to Neo in my favorite film of all time, The Matrix, many of these analysts, they're good people, many of these YouTubers and activists, but they don't have a moral core where they're willing to put themselves on the line. They're not willing to put any skin in the game. They want you and other leaders and the few people we have left on the planet, they want them to take the hit. They want them to suffer. But they're not willing to do anything, but they want change. They want the reward, but they don't want the sacrifice. And that's the problem we have here, especially in the Western world, a crisis of confidence. And until that ends, for the most part, people are just going to be sleepwalking into the long night. And thank you, Moats, and looking forward to Mrs. G.
Wow, Mrs. G will be up in just a minute, and grateful for the very kind things you said about her segments. I'd like to make them longer, but some parts of the show would then have to be sacrificed in that regard. But she's definitely not just a pretty face, though pretty face she indeed is. As to my health, and I'm grateful for your solicitous remarks, actually don't be confused by my coughing fit earlier. I'm in tip-top condition now. I'm on top of my heart arrhythmia problem. The drugs are working. It's just that it's the middle of the night and I am shouting in a monologue because I can't contain myself, and that threw me. But I'm in very good condition and definitely in very good heart, if you'll forgive the pun. I've been wandering around Hong Kong, being stopped by people who either knew me back in the day when they were, as I was, in Britain, but have now departed, as I earlier discussed, or are avid watchers of this show. It's an astonishing thing. I can't go anywhere in Hong Kong without being recognized and approached for the usual selfies and brief discussions. And it happened this evening twice. And in both cases, the men involved were avid watchers of the show and had closely followed my political life in earlier times. And you're right to draw attention to the plebiscite. If you want me back in the USA, in the UK rather, you're going to have to vote for me. And you can do so. You can do so in May, in the local council elections, where we are about to announce phenomenal new alliances with independents in the great city of Birmingham, the city of Shabana Mahmood. Now, you'll remember Shabana. I did tell Tony Blair that he would rue the day that he expelled me from my party, and you, Shabana Mahmood, will rue the day that you expelled me and my children from my country, an even more serious expulsion. And we intend to make you pay. We intend to make Labour pay in Birmingham. And we have the potential now, as I will announce in the next couple of days, of fighting every single one of 61 council seats coming up in Birmingham. We have made similar alliances in Oldham, in Bury, we will make this week, in the centre of Manchester, where my friends are poised to seize even more political territory there. And of course, the centre of my political world, the town of Rochdale, that returned me to Parliament in 2024, 24, 25, I've lost count. Someone said to me tonight, which was your constituency again? I said, well, take your pick, because I have represented more people in more places and more diverse places in this country of Britain in Parliament than any other political figure, including the aforementioned Winston Churchill. Erobos, it's been marvellous. I agree with you. Political power does come out of the barrel of a gun, but your ability economically to sustain your production of barrels and guns is, of course, crucial. You cannot remain a world empire if your economy and your society is collapsing within. The Roman Empire is an exemplar in that regard. I would suggest that Caligula, Donald Trump, read about that, but I know he doesn't read anything at all. The back of a McDonald's carton. Well, Erobos, what you've been waiting for is now upon us. It is the wonderful Gayatri with the social media news roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
First of all, the grand finale of the African Cup of Nations, and it's been a tense but goalless 90 minutes. So we are heading into extra time. Penalties.
Are they going straight to penalties?
between
Wow.
no, extra time, sorry. Between Senegal and the host country, Morocco. Whoever wins AFCON 2026 can be considered a wonderful success in terms of its sports, in
It's a
terms
pity
of
that
its...
they both can't win. Two of my favorite countries fighting in the AFCON final.
Yes, these are two great countries, and Morocco has hosted it wonderfully. It's been a great display of African cultures and most of all African unity. Best symbolized by no one less than Michel Kuka Boladinga. And we all know him from standing right there amongst all the fans from the Congo. He just stood there with his arms raised. And Congo made it all the way to the round of 16 until they were kicked out by Algeria, another great nation. And why did he do this? Not only did he have great resemblance, but it was a whole tribute to their nationalist hero, Patrice Lumumba. And Patrice Lumumba, it is today his death anniversary. 64 years ago, 17 January 1961, the great Pan-Africanist hero, leader, first Prime Minister of the Congo. He stood for unity, anti-colonialism. He stood for the very fact that Congolese natural resources should be in the hands of the Congolese. So this is the statue after which Michel was mimicking his posture throughout the whole games that Congo played. But then, of course, Patrice Lumumba became a bit too daring to the West. And on this day, the West tortured, executed him, and then dissolved his body in acid. Patrice Lumumba was only 35 years old. And as a form of trophy, the Belgians took his one last remaining piece that came from the acid, which was his gold-crowned tooth. And not until 2022, 6 decades later, did Belgium return this tooth belonging to Patrice Lumumba to his family. And his family, we met just a few months ago in Moscow. We met the son of Patrice Lumumba with his fellow Pan-Africanist leader, Kwame Nkrumah's daughter. We have a picture of them as well together with, imagine, Patrice Lumumba's son and Kwame Nkrumah's daughter stood there with them. African's legacy.
It's
There
so emotional to hear you talk about that. Yeah, there we are with them, or you at least. This is the son of Patrice Lumumba and the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah. The latter couped whilst in China and overthrown by a Western-inspired coup. The former Patrice Lumumba murdered. This is the 62nd anniversary of his murder. You're right, it's his death anniversary, but it's his murder anniversary. He was murdered by white men. He was murdered at the behest of white men. He was murdered at the behest of colonial powers that would not accept that Congolese or indeed African independence must require them relinquishing not just their flag, but their power and their domination over the Congo, over Africa. And when I see those pictures and hear you talk there, it almost makes me weep because, of course, Lumumba's murder was almost identical to the murder of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. They suffered the same fate at the hands of the same people. And the desecration of the human form of Patrice Lumumba, the dissolving in acid of the Prime Minister of Congo, and then the theft of his tooth, which was, by the way, only returned, maybe you said that, just a year ago or two or 3 years ago, it was only returned. They kept it as a trophy of the murder and dismemberment of the Prime Minister of the Congo. Now, you've been doing some research. There are streets dedicated to Patrice Lumumba in a widely diverse set of countries.
Not just in Africa, we have them in Serbia, in Moscow. There's indeed a university named after Patrice Lumumba, in honor of Patrice Lumumba. Across the world, we have the streets and buildings and just Patrice in honor of Patrice Lumumba, because he was such a great man.
And yet so many people in the world have not heard of him.
But he has been revived, thanks to Michel.
He was revived. For the African audience. The Russians kept his name alive all this time with the Patrice Lumumba International Friendship University. We'll be visiting it soon. It was vital that they did so, and the spirit of Lumumba and indeed Nkrumah have got to return. There is no future for Africa if it continues to be a plaything for the colonial empires. And just to be clear, I'm naming them. The murder of Patrice Lumumba was organized and conducted by and under the supervision of Belgium, Britain, and the United States of America. So when you next hear them talk about dictators, when you next hear them talk about criminals in the international political arena, just remember, they murdered the Prime Minister of Congo, the richest country in Africa, then cut him into pieces, then dissolved him in acid. In my lifetime, the people who ruled my country then and now did this. Anything else, Gayatri?
Well, the people who ruled your country. We are in Hong Kong, and how weird is it to be in an Asian environment and looking at Queen Victoria Street, Wellington Street, Cochrane Road, Douglas this, and I just don't see, it's unbelievable, isn't it? We're at the heart where, again, your country was responsible for the incredible, astonishing thing that's called the Opium War.
Yeah, I mean, you can see what they saw in it. It's such a beautiful place in such a strategic area. They might have offered to buy it, but instead they offered to murder it if it were not to cede itself to Britain. Some of these names that you mentioned, Elgin, for example, there's an Elgin Road, quite a prominent road. Who was Elgin? Elgin was the man who burned the Emperor's Summer Palace in Beijing. Elgin was the man who bombarded China until they agreed to allow our opium from our colony in India to enter the country and hook the people on the most catastrophically dangerous drugs. And I wrote a piece, actually, which has gone very well on Facebook, and now it's also on X, in which I examine the madness of all this.
Madness.
I mean, does it not occur to you that there's something strange about the English Empire imagining that it has the right to seize China, force China to take drugs, make profits from the drugs, and make further profits from the territory that we seized? But, you know, one of the most telling things I've discovered, Gayatri, and we came across it in the discussion tonight, was, you know, Bob Marley was quite a philosopher, you know. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. There are a lot of slaves to empire for whom empire never done nothing. There are British people responding to my piece on Hong Kong whose arse is hanging out of their trousers, who don't have tuppence to pay their vaulting electricity bills, who have no future in Britain, still defending the British Empire, in which The elite in Britain milked trillions, not billions, trillions of the wealth belonging to other people. And you've even got some collaborating Chinese here in Hong Kong who quite enjoyed their time as house Negroes, as forelock touchers, servants to the Buana, servants to the